Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the word tolerance. Tolerance was the branding used to push the degeneracy we're witnessing today, and it really is the perfect word to describe what's been taking place, and for the past several decades at least. I was thinking about the word tolerance specifically because I was trying to figure out how our society has come to tolerate things like trans kids, just as an example. But the examples are endless, and the list gets longer every day. And yes, our society at large is tolerant of this behavior, and many even embrace and celebrate it. You might be personally horrified or angry, but even you are tolerant of this behavior. Now let me explain what I mean by this. What does an alcoholic say when they explain that it takes a lot more alcohol than the average person in order to make them feel drunk? They say they have a high tolerance. The same is true, if not more so, for opioid addicts. In fact, heavy users of heroin might have a tolerance so high that if someone who had never injected heroin before in their life were to use the same dose, their heart would stop. This phenomenon of tolerance is true of drugs all across the board, even cigarettes. The first cigarette I ever smoked made me so dizzy I had to sit down. But a heavy smoker will never experience that sensation. Never. Why? Because of tolerance. The human body and mind adapts to foreign substances extremely well. The brain will rewire receptors and pathways when it's overwhelmed with chemicals and stimulants in an attempt to return the user experience back to normal, which is also what leads to dependency. When people use, pretty much any drug on a regular basis for any extended amount of time, once they develop tolerance to that drug, that means they've also simultaneously developed a dependency to that drug. An alcoholic, for example, might wake up sober and experience excruciating headaches or maybe even violent shakes. This is the result of their mind and body trying to adjust for the expected presence of alcohol when the alcohol is not there. That might sound like an extreme example, and people don't get to that level right away. It takes a long time for the mind and body to adjust to being intoxicated all the time, for it to build this tolerance, this dependency. And because it will take just as long for the mind and body to readjust to being sober, most addicts, they want to just be normal. They want to feel normal again as quickly as possible, so they just drink, and the pain goes away, the equilibrium returns. Because the effects of the drug are now evening out what the mind and body was doing to counteract it. Now, nothing I just explained is anything new, and I suspect many, if not all of you, have first-hand experience with some form of this. And I don't mean, you don't have to be a heroin addict or an alcoholic. It could be something as simple as coffee or even sugar. Anytime you put something into your mind, into your body that alters the mind's natural order, the mind will always attempt to return to the natural state, the natural order. And it'll take extreme actions to do so. And when this happens, the person whose mind that this is, they're going to perceive that as an increase in tolerance because the same amount of substance or stimuli no longer makes them feel the same because the brain's trying to even it out. So they think, oh, my tolerance has gone up, and now I have to increase the dosage to overcome this tolerance. So they increase the dosage, but like clockwork, the mind once again tries to even it out. It tries to nullify this stimuli that's not natural. It's trying to return the experience of reality back to normal, back to the natural order of things. And that is the cycle of tolerance. So what does that have to do with your tolerance to degeneracy? When the mind is subjected to degeneracy, it's identical to being subjected to a drug. Pornography is an obvious example. Pornography addicts, just like any other addict, will find themselves in this exact same cycle of stimulation, increased tolerance, increased dosage. The pornography addict will need to increase the degenerate nature of their pornography in order to experience that same effect that a sex scene in a rated PG-13 movie might have seemed when they first were experiencing pornographic images. As their tolerance increases, so does the depravity in the content they have to consume. It's exactly like a drug. And while addiction to pornography is getting extremely common, let's just say that's an extreme example. It doesn't matter. Just like you don't have to be a heroin addict to experience this cycle of stimulation, tolerance, increased dosage. You know, like I said before, it could be something as simple as caffeine in your coffee. You don't have to be addicted to porn in order to experience this cycle of tolerance, of the degeneracy in society. When I was a young teenager, a friend of mine got a job at a theater that was near my house, and I've always been into filmmaking, so it was kind of amazing to have this friend that could and often did sneak me into movies that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to afford to see, but also movies that I wasn't old enough to get into. And I still remember being this bright-eyed, although not totally innocent kid, sitting down to watch the movie Seven with Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kevin Spacey. Big budget, big name film. Excited to watch this movie I'd heard so much about. Now, right now, I want to focus less on the plot or the meaning of the film and more just on how the movie made me feel. Now, I was a young boy from a religious family where watching rated R movies and even edgy TV like The Simpsons was strictly forbidden. So this younger version of myself had essentially no tolerance at all to the images and some of the sounds I was about to be subjected to. I still remember sitting in the dark by myself. I remember the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack creeping in the darkness, booming in the theater, while disgusting images flashed quickly across the screen. Now, for me personally, the fact that the filmmakers used Nine Inch Nails really kind of amplified this experience, this feeling of foreboding, and to be perfectly honest, evil that I was beginning to feel in the theater. You see, music is another example of this cycle, the stimulation, tolerance, increased dosage, that same cycle. I had experienced this very cycle specifically with Nine Inch Nails. I bought the Nine Inch Nails album Pretty Hate Machine when I was in grade school because this older kid thought it was cool and was always wearing Nine Inch Nails t-shirts, and I wanted to know what it was all about. At the time, I think I was listening to like 80s synth pop, like Depeche Mode, Information Society. I was a nerd, so I loved music that was made with computers. And Nine Inch Nails made music with computers. So I thought, hey, this could be right up my alley. And it's really strange for me to try to explain what I'm about to say, because I'm 100% certain that the musical tolerance of almost everyone, if not everyone listening right now in my audience, the musical tolerance that you already have is so high just from this constant bombardment of subversive, degenerate music, that it's going to almost sound impossible to relate to what I'm about to say. But I swear, as a kid who was brought up as a kid, a real little kid, on classical music and on hymns at church, uplifting music in my household, when I listened to the album Pretty Hate Machine by Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor's first big album, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was participating in something wrong. That I was doing something wrong, something evil. As I listened to that tape, to give you an idea of how long ago it was, in the headphones of my Walkman, I felt guilty. I felt that at any moment, someone was going to catch me in this act, and I was going to get in trouble. I instinctively knew that this music that openly mocked God, that twisted the structure of musical notes and arranged sounds in a way that were specifically designed to make the listener feel uneasy. I knew that by allowing this into my mind, I was doing something wrong. I was eroding part of myself. But I couldn't stop listening. Just like a drug addict, I bought Nine Inch Nails album after Nine Inch Nails album, each darker, more explicit and extreme than the one before it. I remember when I first listened to the album Broken, and that came out about 2 years before the movie Seven. I felt physically afraid when I listened to that album for the first time. I was pumped full of adrenaline and cortisol. It was an increase of dosage from the album previous. And I felt just as afraid, just as titillated in a degenerate way, that I was doing something wrong and getting away with it. I was sincerely worried about what would happen if anyone in my family discovered what was in my headphones. The feeling like if they found out what I was listening to, what I was putting in my brain, it was literally the same as if my parents were to find a heroin needle in my sock drawer. But even with all that stimulation going on inside of my brain, which I remember vividly, like it was yesterday, I still had that still, small voice in my head, trying to be heard over the blaring music from my headphones, telling me this wasn't right. I needed to stop. But of course I didn't stop. The music frightened and excited me until slowly, over time, it didn't. And once again, I had to increase the dosage. You know, and the sad thing is, just with a lot of drugs, how the addict becomes an addict because he's chasing that first high. He wants that first feeling. But he'll never get it again, ever. The tolerance is a permanent shift in brain structure, chemistry, or whatever. It'll never be that first high. The same is true with, I wouldn't call it a high, but the experience that I felt listening to this music. If I listen to that album today, I'm not going to have, I might feel a little gross at times, but I'm not going to have anywhere near the level of, subdued terror that I felt. That part of me is already dead. And it's just it never comes back. So in the darkness of that theater, my brain was once again under assault by an increased dosage of subversion. And as the credits wrapped up, leaving me in a state of unease and a feeling I couldn't quite articulate until Trent Reznor utters the last line, maybe the only line of the song that played during the credits. Almost as if to give you one last chance to reject the images and the sounds and the feelings that you were about to experience. He says, in a mocking inverse of what the audience is experiencing, "You bring me closer to God." He obviously knows what he's doing. I think it's impossible, really, to argue what his intentions were in creating this music. It was specifically designed to push people further away from God. And it's now something that I realize that maybe I didn't realize then, maybe I did, that terrifying foreign feeling that I'd been experiencing, that guilt and shame that I'd done something wrong, and that excitement, the thrill that my mind and soul was building a tolerance to. It was the absence of God. It was the rejection of God. And there is an addictive quality to that. There's a false sensation of power in that. And that sensation is what the brain is overstimulated by. And it's that sensation that the brain builds a tolerance to feel that rush. I had to sit in a dark room watching despicable images from the twisted minds of the filmmakers. I had to listen to the sounds of decay and unease. I had to feel a sick, kind of terrified delight from rejecting God in this small but significant way. And by the way, for the atheists out there who are shaking their heads, do you deny the existence of a conscience? Regardless of where you think it comes from, do you deny the existence of that still small voice that we all hear but often ignore? Would you deny, regardless of what you think the source of that voice is, that deliberately rejecting that voice and indulging in the superficial giddiness that comes from that rejection, would you deny that that's the road to hell? Whether you interpret that literally or metaphorically, I don't think that you would. This film, this music, these are just tiny examples. They're molecules in the ocean of degenerate propaganda that's been flooding our systems with one goal in mind: increasing our tolerance. Little by little, people not only tolerate the degeneracy that increases with every passing moment, they want that short-lived thrill that gets even shorter every time. Every time they increase that dose so they can have just a little taste of what it was like the first time they rejected God. And the movie Seven did exactly that. It takes the audience into a world full of horror. And without God, it perverts the natural order at every opportunity, while exposing the audience to sights and sounds that will increase their tolerance and their appetite for that apprehension, that dread that can only exist outside the presence of God. I lost a little bit of myself that night, which is why I think it's so clear in my mind. After watching that movie, I quietly snuck out of the theater. I started walking home. I remember it so clearly. It's oddly one of my clearest memories from that time in my life. I was nervous, unsettled, a little bit paranoid. Suddenly, the streets that I'd walked 1,000 times before seemed dangerous and malicious. And with every step I took in the dark, my mind worked feverishly to balance out these chemicals that were rushing through my veins, to counteract these foreign stimulants. And with every step, my innocence was calcified with the putrid debris from this film that I had voluntarily subjected myself to. Debris that would crystallize and remain inside my mind forever. I may not have known it then, but at that moment, I was further away from God than at any other moment in my relatively short life. And what's more, my journey, it had just begun. For BlackPilled, I'm Devin Stack. If you like my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you share. If you want to support my videos, you can become a patron at patreon.com/BlackPilled, or pick up a copy of my book, link is in the description, or send crypto to one of the addresses below.